She was bleeding on platform 9 at 11:47 p.m. No train coming, no people watching, just cold concrete, flickering lights, and four men walking slowly from the far end of the platform, the kind of slow that tells you they're not in a hurry because they know you have nowhere to go. Amara Osei pressed her back against the cold wall and looked down at her side. The cut wasn't fatal. Not yet. But she'd been running for 11 minutes on adrenaline and a prayer, and neither of those was going to last much longer. She had a phone. No signal. She had a bag. Inside it, a flash drive. On that flash drive, 61 pages of forensic documentation that exposed $278 million in buried financial crimes. That was why they were coming. That was why she was bleeding. And that right there is where this story begins. Not with a romance. Not with a fairy tale. With a woman alone in the dark, carrying evidence that powerful men wanted buried with her, trying to calculate how many steps she had left before they reached her. She had maybe 40 seconds. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that someone had already been watching her case for 5 months. And he was already on the platform. His name was Kong Si-hoon. And the only reason Amara Osei lived through that night was that she was exactly the person he'd been looking for. Let me take you back. Because this story doesn't start on that platform. It starts 18 months earlier, in a glass-walled office on the 32nd floor of a financial services building in downtown Chicago, where a woman named Amara Osei sat across from a senior compliance director and slid a report across the table. 61 pages. Printed. Tabbed. Color-coded. She'd been up for 31 hours straight finishing it. The director looked at the cover page, looked at her, looked back at the page. "You're sure about this?" he said. "Every number has a source," she said. "Every source has been independently verified. There are 43 flagged anomalies. The pattern starts in 2019 and it compounds. The total figure at the center of this," she paused, "is $278 million. The director put the report face down on the desk. That was the moment Amara should have read the room. He didn't ask which department. He didn't ask for clarification. He didn't reach for a pen to begin notes. He turned it face down and said, "I'm going to need some time to review this internally before we escalate." She nodded. She went back to her desk. She waited. 2 weeks later, she was called into HR. Her access card stopped working the following morning. Amara Osei, forensic accountant, 8 years of clean record, 3 industry commendations, was terminated for conduct inconsistent with company values. No details. A letter, a cleared desk, and an escort to the lobby. She stood on Michigan Avenue at 9:14 a.m. with a box of her things, and the copy of her report sheet had the sense to keep it home. And she thought, okay, so that's how it is. What they didn't know about Amara, what most people got wrong about her, was that being afraid and being stopped were 2 completely different things in her mind. She was afraid. She'd been afraid since the day she found the first anomaly and realized it wasn't a mistake. Mistakes don't have patterns. Mistakes don't trace back to the same name in 7 different subsidiaries across 4 years. Mistakes don't get buried under 3 layers of shell company reclassification. This wasn't a mistake. This was architecture. Someone had built this, carefully, deliberately, over years. And someone very high up in that organization had known about it long enough to recognize her report as an existential threat the moment she set it on that desk. She went home. She made coffee. She opened her laptop. She began building the case from the outside. Here's what you need to understand about forensic accounting, the kind Amara did at the level she operated. It's not about finding money. It's about following the story that money tells. Every transaction is a sentence. Every account is a chapter. Every subsidiary, every reclassification, every administrative adjustment. Those are the edits. And when you read enough of them in sequence, the story underneath starts to emerge. The story Amara was reading had one name buried at its center. Warren Falk. He wasn't listed anywhere you could easily find him. He wasn't on the board. He wasn't in the filing documents. He didn't show up in the annual reports or the executive biographies or the press releases. But he was in the numbers. Every major irregular transfer, filtered, rerouted, reclassified, had a through line. And when Amara traced the through lines back far enough, past the subsidiaries and the shell structures and the offshore accounts, she found a name on a document that should never have existed. A consulting agreement, dated 2018, signed by the company's CFO and a private advisory entity with no website, no registered address, no employees on record. The entity's sole director, Warren Falk. $278 million over 4 years, funneled through a ghost. That was what was on the flash drive. That was what they wanted back. For 6 months after she was fired, Amara worked quietly. She rebuilt the report. She added layers. She documented the methodology so thoroughly that any forensic audit firm in the country could have replicated her findings from scratch. She contacted 3 attorneys. 2 of them stopped returning her calls after the second meeting. The third one told her flat out, "There are people connected to this case who don't lose in courts. Not because they're innocent, because they have better lawyers and longer memories than the legal system has patience for." She thanked him and left. She filed a formal whistleblower complaint with the SEC. 2 months later, a man named Dex Caro, a corporate insider, former board advisor, current executive consultant, filed for a temporary restraining order. In legal terms, a TRO is a court order. It freezes action. It can silence disclosures. In the right hands, in the hands of someone who knows how to use legal machinery as a weapon, it can bury a whistleblower complaint before it ever gains traction. Caro TRO claimed that Amara's findings were based on confidential documents obtained unlawfully, that she'd violated proprietary agreements, that her so-called forensic report constituted defamation against named executives and created material risk for the company's shareholders. It was a legal attack dressed up in paperwork. And it was working. Amara's SEC complaint was frozen pending review of the TRO. Her license was flagged. And 3 nights later, she was followed home for the first time. She noticed the car. Black sedan. No plates she could read in the dark. It pulled up 2 blocks from her apartment and sat there for 40 minutes after she went inside. She didn't sleep that night. She moved the flash drive. She started varying her routes. And she kept working. Because here's the thing about Amara Osei that you need to understand before this story gets to the part where blood hits concrete at 11:47 p.m. She didn't file that report because she wanted to be a hero. She filed it because the alternative was knowing she'd seen something real and said nothing. She was a forensic accountant. Numbers were her language. And the story the numbers were telling was a crime, a massive, organized, deliberate crime that had cost real people real money, and it had been hidden for years by people with enough power to make it disappear forever. She couldn't unknow it. She couldn't pretend she hadn't seen it. So she kept going, right up until the night they stopped following her from a distance. It was a Thursday in November. Amara had taken the last northbound train from downtown because she'd been at a library working until it closed, The library was one of the few places she felt certain she wasn't being surveilled. No cameras with facial recognition. She got off 2 stops early. She varied her exits. Platform 9 at the Lakeview station was empty. That wasn't unusual at 11:30 p.m. What was unusual was the sound, or rather, the absence of it. The station had a low electrical hum from the lighting rig. It was gone. Half the lights were out. She walked quickly toward the exit stairs. They came from behind a maintenance access door on the far left. For men, not running, just appearing and then beginning to move toward her with that measured, unhurried pace that is somehow more frightening than a sprint because it says, "We already know how this ends." She ran, not toward the exit. The exit was too far. She ran toward the far end of the platform, putting distance between herself and them, buying seconds, calculating. Her side hit the railing at the platform's end. Dead end. She pressed against the wall, looked down at her side. She'd been grazed. She didn't even remember it happening. A blade, not a gun. Close quarters. One of them had gotten close enough at some point during the sprint through the station. She looked at the blood on her fingers, pressed her arm against the cut, looked back down the platform. For men, 40 feet, closing. She had her phone out. No signal. She had the flash drive in her bag. She had 61 pages of documented fraud, and no one on earth who knew where she was. She thought, with a strange calm that surprises her even now when she describes it, this is the part where someone either comes or they don't. He came from the shadow of the far platform pillar. She heard him before she saw him, or rather, she heard the sound of him. The specific silence that follows when someone very deliberately stops moving. A presence, not a sound. He stepped into the edge of the light. Tall. Dark coat. Korean. Maybe mid-30s. Still as water. He was looking at the 4 men, not at her. "You're on the wrong platform," he said. His voice was, she would describe this later, like the calm before the kind of weather that breaks things. The 4 men stopped. One of them said something she couldn't make out. A name, maybe. A warning. What happened next took less than 90 seconds. She would try to reconstruct it afterward and fail, not because it was too fast to follow, but because the man moved with such economy of motion that the violence almost didn't register as violence. It registered as geometry. A series of decisions made in fractions of seconds that resulted in 3 men down and 1 running. He let the last one run. Then he turned and looked at her for the first time. She was pressed against the wall, arm against her side, and she was, to her own later embarrassment, pointing her phone at him like it was something that would help her. He looked at the phone, looked at her side, looked at her face. "You're bleeding," he said. "I know," she said. "Amara Osei," he said. Forensic accountant. Former senior analyst at Meridian Capital Group. Filed a 61-page whistleblower report on March 14th. Fired 12 days later. Currently in possession of documentation related to a $278 million fraud case involving a man named Warren Falk. The silence on that platform was total. She stared at him. "Who are you?" she said. He held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds. "Someone who's been watching your case for 5 months," he said. "We should go. The one who ran will call more." She didn't move. "I'm not going anywhere with someone who hasn't told me their name." Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile. "Kong Si-hoon," he said. She knew the name. She didn't know why she knew it, not in that specific moment, but she'd heard it. In a different context, a different world. "We should go," he said again. She went. Not because she trusted him. She was very clear about that later, in conversations she'd have with herself and eventually with him. She went because she was bleeding on an empty platform at midnight with no signal and 4 men, now 3 men and a phone call, who wanted to make sure that flash drive never reached anyone who could use it. She did the math. She always did the math. Going with a dangerous, unknown quantity, risk level high, outcome uncertain. Staying on the platform, risk level near certain, outcome fatal. She went. He took her to a building she would later learn he owned, though owned was a word that barely touched the reality of Kang Si-hoon's relationship with large sections of Chicago's architecture. He owned buildings the way some people own suits, as tools, as instruments, as extensions of a larger design. The building was in the West Loop. Ground floor was a legitimate restaurant. He took her up a private elevator to the 4th floor. A woman, mid-50s, efficient, no nonsense, appeared within seconds of their arrival and began cleaning the wound without introduction or visible alarm. This was, Amara realized, a woman who had seen worse. The cut was 3 inches, not deep enough for stitches, but deep enough to need proper care. Kang Si-hoon sat across the room, jacket still on, watching the process with the same stillness he'd had on the platform. When the woman was done, she left. Amara looked around the room, clean lines, expensive and unshowy, 3 screens on one wall that were currently dark, a desk with 2 chairs across from it, and then she looked at Kang Si-hoon. 5 months, she said. Yes. Why? He leaned forward, put his hands on the desk. Because Warren Falk owes me something. And what you found is the cleanest leverage I've encountered on him in 3 years. She processed that. You want to use my report. I want to use your skills, he said. The report is a start. But there's more in those accounts than what you've already found. I need someone who can read the full picture. I'm a forensic accountant, not a criminal asset. I know what you are. Then you know I won't do anything that compromises the legal integrity of what I've already built. I'm not asking you to. She looked at him for a long moment. What are you asking? To work with me. Inside the data. Finish what you started, but with resources you don't currently have access to. She shook her head once slowly. I have conditions. He said nothing. Waited. Everything I find, every document, every trace, every number, goes into a legally defensible record. Nothing gets used outside of a legitimate exposure pathway. I don't care what your world runs on. In this work, we do it clean. Agreed. I want access to the full account architecture, however you have it. Agreed. If at any point what you're asking me to do crosses a line I've set, I walk. No consequences. He held her gaze. Agreed. She almost let herself be surprised by how quickly he accepted. But she read people the way she read numbers, and what she saw in his face wasn't compliance. It was recognition. He had expected those terms. He had been waiting for exactly this version of this conversation. That told her something about how long he had actually been watching this case, and how much he already knew about the woman sitting across from him. She didn't mention that she'd noticed, but she filed it away. They started working the following morning. Amara was given her own room. Not a prison, not a gilded cage, but a room with a lock she controlled and a window with a view of the city she'd spent 8 years making herself essential to. She was given full access to a secured server system that she spent 2 hours auditing before she touched it for actual work. Old habit. You don't trust a locked room until you've checked the walls. The server was clean. Impressively clean, actually. Kang Si-hoon appeared at her door at 8 a.m. with 2 coffees and the specific silence of someone who isn't accustomed to knocking but has made a decision to do it anyway. She took the coffee. She didn't thank him. They both understood something about the texture of this arrangement. Politeness wasn't the language they were speaking. Precision was. I need the full transaction architecture going back to 2017, she said. Not just the public filings, the internal routing, intercompany accounts, subsidiary ledgers, any advisory agreements. You'll have it by noon. I also need the board minutes. All of them. 2018 to present. A pause. Not hesitation, calculation. Some of those don't exist in official records. Then I need the ones that exist in unofficial ones. He looked at her for a moment. Something shifted behind his eyes, not surprise, but a kind of recalibration. By end of day, he said. She turned back to her screen. He left. This was how they began. Let me tell you what Amara Ose looked like when she worked. She was the kind of person who could make a spreadsheet feel like a crime novel. She worked in silence, not the absent silence of someone distracted, but the active silence of someone running a parallel conversation in their head at all times. She moved through data the way a surgeon moves through a procedure. No wasted motion, no hesitation, each step building on the last with a logic that was almost musical. She kept a yellow legal pad to her left. Not for notes. She had digital notes, but for the numbers she wanted to see with her hand. There was something about writing a figure by hand, she'd once told a colleague, that made you feel its weight differently. Made it real. She wrote $278 million on that pad on her first morning in that building. And underneath it, she began adding the numbers that, by the time she was done, would rewrite everything. Kang Si-hoon delivered what he promised. By noon, full transaction architecture. Intercompany routing logs going back to 2016, a year further than she'd asked for. She didn't comment on that. She started there. By end of day, board minutes. Unofficial ones. Photographed pages from physical meeting logs, which meant someone had been in the room or had a contact who had been in the room at the right moments. She worked until 2 a.m., slept 4 hours, came back. The anomalies began on day 2. The 43 flagged anomalies in her original report were the surface layer, the story the numbers told when you looked at them straight on. But accounting fraud at this level doesn't live on the surface. It lives in the transitions, in the rounding differences that no one questions because they're a fraction of a percent of a massive number. In the intercompany loans that appear legitimate until you chart all of them together and notice that the repayment schedules correlate perfectly, too perfectly, with specific quarters where external auditors were conducting reviews. On day 3, Amara found the first new anomaly. It was a routing entry in the advisory account, the one connected to Warren Fox Consulting Entity. The amount was small, $47,000. Easy to miss. But the date on the transfer was 3 days before the consulting agreement it was attached to had been formally signed. Payment before contract, which meant the contract wasn't the agreement. The contract was the cover. The agreement had been made somewhere else, at some other time, and the paper trail was built afterward to justify money that had already moved. She stood up, walked to the window, stood there for 90 seconds, looking at the city. Then she sat back down and started pulling the thread. Kang Si-hoon gave her space. This was something she noticed and, in the privacy of her own assessment, appreciated. He was present. He moved through that building at all hours with the quiet certainty of someone who lived inside his own authority, but he didn't hover. He didn't check in every hour to ask for updates. He didn't explain himself unnecessarily. He brought information when she asked for it and withdrew when she didn't. He sent her documents through the secured system with no commentary. Sometimes just a folder name and a date range. She would open them and find exactly what she'd been about to ask for. This happened 3 times in the first week before she acknowledged it. She found him at the desk in the outer room on the evening of day 6. He was reading something, actual paper, handwritten pages, and he didn't look up immediately. "You knew I was going to need the subsidiary routing tables before I asked," she said. He looked up, waited. "You're reading these documents too," she said. "You know this case. I've been building my own picture of it for 3 years. Then why do you need me?" He set the paper down. "Because my picture is incomplete where numbers are involved. I know the architecture of the scheme. I know the people in it. What I don't have, what I've never been able to produce, is a documented, irrefutable, legally structured account of how the money moved." He held her gaze. "That's what you do." She was quiet for a moment. "And Warren Falk," she said. "What does he owe you?" A long pause. The kind of pause that doesn't mean someone is deciding whether to answer. It means they're deciding how much of the truth to give you. "Someone I cared about," he said finally, "was connected to one of the companies Fox scheme defrauded. The money that disappeared, part of it was pension funds. Real people's savings. One of those people was in my care." A beat. "She's not anymore." Amara heard what was underneath that sentence. She didn't push. "I see," she said. She went back to work. By the end of the first week, she had mapped 17 additional anomalies beyond her original 43. 60 in total. Each one documented, sourced, cross-referenced. By the end of the second week, she had traced the routing pattern all the way back to its origin point. Not 2018 as the consulting agreement suggested, not 2019 as the original audit trail implied, but 2016. For years longer than anyone had found, which meant the total figure wasn't 278 million. She pulled up her calculator. She checked the number 3 times. Then she walked out of her room and found Kong Si-hoon. "The figure is wrong," she said. He looked up from his phone. "It's not 278 million, she said. "That's what's traceable from 2019 forward. But the scheme started in 2016. When you add the earlier routing, which was structured differently, smaller denominations, more carefully hidden, the actual total is closer to 412 million. The room was very quiet. "You're certain?" he said. "I've checked it 3 times. I'll check it 3 more. But yes." He stood slowly. Not from surprise. She was getting a sense that Kong Si-hoon was rarely surprised. But from weight. The weight of a number that large, applied to something this personal. 412 million, he said. "Dollars," she said. "Moved over 9 years. Hidden across 4 jurisdictions. And all of it traces back to Warren Falk." He was quiet for a long moment. "Document all of it," he said. "I already am." She went back to her room. He stood exactly where she'd left him for several more minutes, alone in the quiet, and she heard, she was almost certain she heard, the sound of him exhaling very slowly, like something that had been held under pressure for a very long time had just been given the first millimeter of release. It was on the 14th night, 3:14 a.m., that the case cracked wide open. Amara had been working on the board minutes for 3 days. Not all boards keep official minutes that are identical to the conversations that actually happened in those rooms. The official record and the actual record are often 2 entirely different documents. What Kong Si-hoon had given her were the actual ones, the photographed pages from the physical meeting logs. She'd read them all. She'd been looking for one specific thing, a resolution. In corporate governance, a board resolution is a formal recorded decision. It's the moment when a board of directors officially authorizes something, a major contract, a financial commitment, a structural change. Resolutions have numbers. They have dates. They exist on paper. And if they're buried, if someone removes them from the official record, they still leave fingerprints. In the voting records, in the follow-up correspondence, in the financial actions that result from them. Amara had found 3 separate points in the financial architecture where money had moved in response to what should have been a formally authorized decision, but where no corresponding resolution appeared in the official board minutes. 3 authorizations. 3 gaps. On the 14th night, at 3:14 a.m., she found the resolution. It was in the back pages of the August 2019 meeting log, not indexed, not numbered, inserted between 2 unrelated agenda items as if someone had placed it there in a hurry, or perhaps as if someone had initially intended to remove it and then reconsidered. Board Resolution 2019-47B. Authorization for a long-term advisory retainer. Sole beneficiary. Warren Fox Consulting Entity. Amount authorized per annum. $47 million. Duration. 9 years. $47 million per year. 9 years. She did the math. $423 million. Formally authorized by a board resolution that had been intentionally omitted from every official filing, every regulatory submission, every document the company had ever shared with any oversight body. And the person responsible for maintaining the board minute records, the person whose signature appeared on every officially submitted version, was a man named Dex Caro. He hadn't just been involved. He had been the architect of the burial. She stared at Resolution 2019-47B for a long moment. Then she wrote Dex Caro name on her legal pad and underlined it 3 times. She didn't go to Kong Si-hoon at 3:14 a.m. She worked through the rest of the night, building the documentation around the resolution, connecting it backward to the anomalies, connecting it forward to the financial movements, building a chain of evidence that would hold up not just in a corporate review, but in a federal court. She worked until 6 a.m. She slept 2 hours. At 8 a.m., she knocked on Kong Si-hoon's door. She noted later, with some private amusement, that she was now the one knocking, and when he opened it she saw that he'd been awake for a while too. The desk behind him had papers on it. He was still in last night's shirt. "I found the resolution," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he stepped aside to let her in. She walked him through everything. The board minutes. The gap. Resolution 2019-47B. Dex Caro name on every omitted submission. The number. He listened without interrupting. He asked 2 questions, both of them precise, both of them the questions she would have asked if their positions were reversed. When she was done, he was quiet for a long time. Then, how long to build the full documentation? At this pace? 3 more weeks. To do it right, to make it airtight, 3 weeks. He nodded once. "What do you need?" She handed him a list she'd already prepared. Of course she had. He read it. "You'll have everything on this list by end of day." She moved toward the door. "Amara." She turned. He looked at her, not the way he'd looked at her on the platform, not the assessment and the calculation. Something else. Something she didn't have a category for yet from him. "Good work," he said. 2 words. From Kong Si-hoon, she was already learning. 2 words was a speech. She nodded. She went back to work. Amara would think later The night the arrangement began to be something else. Not dramatically, not with declaration. Just two people at a desk in the early hours of the morning, building something that mattered, and the slow awareness that the other person's mind was one of the few she'd encountered that could keep pace with hers. She didn't say this. He didn't say anything either. But the quality of the silence between them changed. And both of them noticed, and neither of them mentioned it, and that exact configuration was how it began. The federal courtroom was cold and fluorescent and entirely indifferent to drama. Amara Osei walked in wearing a charcoal suit she'd had since her 3rd year as an accountant, the one she wore when precision was the whole point. She carried a structured document binder that contained 312 pages of organized, sourced, cross-referenced evidence documentation. Dex Caro was already there with 3 attorneys. He looked at her when she walked in. She looked at him. He was a man in his mid-50s, silver-haired, the kind of face that had been carefully maintained to project authority and trustworthiness. He had the look of someone who was accustomed to rooms going the way he needed them to. She sat down, opened her binder, and did not look at him again. The motion proceeded. Caro lead attorney presented the TRO application, stolen documents, corporate espionage, reputational and shareholder harm. When it was Amara's turn, she stood. She was not an attorney. She made that clear at the outset. She was appearing as the subject of the TRO and as the author of the contested analysis. She had requested and received a limited window to present the methodology basis. She had 30 minutes. She used 22. She walked the court through 3 things. First, every document in her analysis was traceable to one of 3 sources: public regulatory filings, materials independently shared by a disclosed party with standing, or her own reconstructed analysis derived from public data. Nothing had been extracted from proprietary systems. Nothing had been accessed via any account or credential she no longer held. Second, her methodology was reproducible. She had prepared a step-by-step reconstruction protocol, 63 pages, that any qualified forensic accountant could follow independently and arrive at the same findings without reference to any document she'd flagged as sensitive. Third, the TRO itself, in its specific language, contained 2 demonstrably false factual claims, both relating to the supposed method of document acquisition, which she documented with timestamps, server logs, and a declaration from the former board member who had provided the physical meeting logs directly and voluntarily. She sat down. The judge looked at Caro attorneys. "Counsel," she said, "do you have any factual rebuttal to the methodology reconstruction or the source declaration?" A long silence. "We would request a continuance to review the submitted materials." "The motion is for emergency relief," the judge said. "You've had 3 days to prepare. Do you have a factual rebuttal?" Another silence. "The TRO is denied," the judge said, "with prejudice," meaning it couldn't be refiled on the same grounds. Amara closed her binder. She didn't smile. She didn't look at Caro. She picked up her binder and walked out of the courtroom at the same pace she'd walked in. Kang Si-hoon was waiting in the corridor outside. She looked at him. He looked at her. "With prejudice," she said. He said nothing. But something in his face, something she'd been cataloging slowly over 3 weeks of proximity, opened briefly, like a door you don't expect to find unlocked. "Come on," he said. "We're not done." "I know," she said. They walked out together. The following 12 days were the hardest. Not because of legal obstacles. The TRO was dead, and Caro had lost his best weapon. Not because of physical danger. The men on the platform had been a message, and the message had failed, and messages that fail get recalculated. They were hard because the evidence was now so extensive, so complete, so irrefutable, and still had to be assembled into a document that a federal regulator would act on. 312 pages. That was the final count of what Amara and Kang Si-hoon produced together. She did the forensic architecture. Every number, every anomaly, every transaction traced from origin to destination across 9 years of routing. $412 million. 67 flagged anomalies. 23 subsidiary entities. 4 offshore jurisdictions. 1 board resolution, buried and omitted from every official filing. He did something she hadn't expected. On the 7th of those 12 days, he appeared in her doorway and set a folder on the desk beside her. "What's this?" she said. "Operational documentation," he said. Caro Communications Network.
Who was contacted when?
What was communicated? The decision sequence around the TRO filing, around your termination, around the early suppression of your report. She opened the folder. Inside were communication records, calendared meetings, a timeline of decisions made by Caro and others in the months since she'd first filed her report. "How do you have this?" she said. "I told you. I've been building my own picture for 3 years." She looked at the documents. "These are admissible? With the right framing." She was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up her pen. "Show me the framing." They worked on it together. He knew the operational landscape. She knew the evidentiary standards. It was, she thought at one point, the most genuinely complementary working relationship she'd ever been in, not because they were similar, but because they were complete in opposite directions. She told him this, briefly, on day 10. She said it the way she said most things. Directly, without decorating it. He looked at her for a moment.
"Yes," he said.
Just that. She'd been learning that this was Kang Si-hoon's equivalent of a full paragraph. So she accepted it. They submitted the full documentation package on a Wednesday. 312 pages to the SEC. A parallel filing to the Department of Justice. A summary brief to 2 investigative journalists who had been covering financial crimes. Kang Si-hoon knew who to trust. She took his judgment on that and filed her own trust audit afterward and found it held. Resolution 2019-47B. Warren Falk. $412 million. 9 years. Dex Caro, named explicitly as the individual responsible for suppressing the resolution from every official filing since 2019. The documentation was airtight. Amara knew it was airtight because she'd had 2 independent forensic accountants, both carefully selected, both contacted without connection to anyone in the case, review the methodology. Both had confirmed it. Both had offered to provide supporting declarations. She filed those too. After the submissions were sent, she stood at the window of that 4th-floor room in the West Loop and looked at the city for a long time. She'd been in this building for 31 days. She'd arrived bleeding. She was leaving with a case file that would, she believed, she had to believe, dismantle a 9-year fraud and put the people responsible in front of consequences they'd spent nearly a decade building walls against. She'd arrived alone. That part, she wasn't sure about anymore. Here's what happened after the submission. The SEC launched a formal investigation within 16 days of receiving the documentation. This was fast, unusually fast, which told people who understood these processes that the documentation had been comprehensive enough to immediately justify elevated priority. Warren Falk's name appeared in federal investigation filings for the first time 43 days after Amara Osei had arrived on a bleeding, desperate night on platform 9. 43 days. The same number as her original anomaly count. She noticed that. She wrote it on her legal pad and looked at it for a moment, and then she turned the page and started her next set of notes. Dex Caro legal situation deteriorated rapidly once the board resolution surfaced in official investigation records. A buried corporate board resolution is not an embarrassment. It's obstruction. It's evidence tampering. It's a criminal act, not a compliance failure. His 3 attorneys became 5. It didn't help. The TRO that had been filed with prejudice now appeared in the investigation record as evidence of a pattern of legal weaponization. Every attempt he'd made to suppress her work had been documented, and in the federal investigation context, suppression attempts are not defenses. They're corroboration. Amara's forensic accounting license, which had been flagged and under review since the original TRO, was reinstated. She was sitting in a coffee shop 3 blocks from her apartment when the email came through. She read it twice, set her phone down, picked up her coffee. Then she picked up her phone and texted one person. The word she sent was reinstated. The response came 30 seconds later. A single word, dinner. She stared at that word for a full minute. Then she laughed, a real laugh, short and genuine, the kind that escapes before you can perform it, and typed back, name a place. His response, the restaurant downstairs from where you did most of your best work. 7 p.m. I made a reservation 3 weeks ago. She put her phone down. 3 weeks ago. She thought about that for a while. 3 weeks ago, they'd been on day 14. The night she'd found the resolution. The 3:14 a.m. night. The night she'd knocked on his door in the morning and walked him through everything. He'd made a reservation for dinner 3 weeks ago. On a night when they'd been working until 4 a.m. and neither of them had said anything out loud that wasn't about evidence or methodology or citation cross-referencing. She sat with that for a while. Because here's the thing about Amara Osei, she was very good at accounting, at following traces, at finding the moment where the story actually started, before the official story claimed it did. And the reservation 3 weeks ago told her something. The same way the pre-contract payment in the advisory account told her the agreement had been made before the paper said it was. The arrangement that was supposed to be strategic, the cold, calculated arrangement between a forensic accountant and a mafia boss who needed her specific skills, had made a decision that neither of them had formally documented. Sometime before the TRO hearing, or maybe during it, or maybe on the night they'd worked until 4 a.m., the arrangement had become something else. Not loudly, not with declaration, not with any of the dramatic machinery that romance is supposed to arrive with. Just quietly. The way the most important things tend to happen. Like a number in a ledger that looks small until you trace it back far enough and realize it's the origin point of everything. She sent one message, 7 p.m. Then she went home to get ready. Before I tell you about that dinner, I want to tell you something. Because this story has been, up to now, about evidence and fraud and legal battles and bleeding on platforms and dangerous men and brave women, and numbers that tell the truth about what people do when they think no one is watching. And all of that is real. All of that matters. But this right here, is the part of the story that almost got lost. Not because it's small. Because the people at the center of it were not people who dramatized themselves. They were people who showed up and did the work and said the minimum necessary and let actions be the language, which made what happened at dinner almost unbearably significant for exactly that reason. She got there first. Old habit. She assessed rooms before committing to them. The restaurant, his restaurant, the legitimate one on the ground floor of his building, was quiet. Midweek, mid-service. Good light. The kind of place that knew how to take itself seriously without making the room feel like it was performing. He arrived exactly at 7. Not early. Not late. 7 p.m., the way someone shows up for a meeting they've been thinking about for some time and have therefore decided not to make into more than it is, by being early. He sat down across from her. They ordered. They ate. They talked for the first time in more than 30 days about things that weren't the case. Not because the case was done, but because it had been submitted, and the work they could do had been done, and the rest was now in the hands of the machinery they'd set in motion. She told him about why she'd become a forensic accountant. He told her, in the specific, rationed way that was entirely his, about why Warren Falk had mattered to him. The woman whose savings had disappeared. Her name was Ji-yeon. She had been his grandmother's closest friend. She'd worked for 40 years. Her pension had been one of the funds touched by the early routing, the 2016 architecture, the part no one had found before Amara. Ji-yeon had died the year before Kang Si-hoon began tracking the case. She never knew why her savings had disappeared. He had spent 3 years trying to build a case that would tell that story out loud. And he hadn't been able to because the piece he was missing was always the same piece. Someone who could read the full picture. Someone who could take what he knew operationally and build it into something that would hold under legal scrutiny. He'd been looking for Amara for 3 years. He'd found her report 18 months ago. He'd been watching her case for 5 months before the platform. She listened to all of this without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Ji-yeon, she said. Yes. The resolution 2019-47, B. It will be in the public filing record, she said. When the investigation concludes. Her name won't be in it, but the story it tells will include what happened to people like her. That part will be documented. He looked at her. I know. Good, she said. I wanted you to know that I know that's what this was for. A long pause. Yes, he said, quietly. And that exchange was the most emotionally unguarded either of them would be for some time. Not because they were restrained people by nature, but because they were both, in their different ways, people who had learned that the things you value most are safer when you hold them carefully. He walked her out at the end of the evening. On the sidewalk outside, Chicago in late January, cold and clear, and the kind of night where the city sounds different. The sounds carry farther, more distinct against the cold air. She was about to say something. He said, I knew your name for 18 months before Platform 9. She stopped, turned to look at him. I know, she said. He looked at her, a question in his face. You anticipated every resource I was going to ask for, she said. You had the board minutes before I'd told you I needed them. You made a dinner reservation 3 weeks ago on a night when we were working until 4 a.m. on citation cross-referencing. She held his gaze. You knew my name for 18 months. You'd read my report. You knew exactly who you were bringing into that building. He didn't deny it. I needed to know if you'd still have come, he said. If you'd known.
She thought about that.
Really thought about it, the way she thought about everything, following the trace back to the origin point. Yes, she said. He nodded once. Slowly. 7 p.m., she said. Next week. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, but the thing that lived in the same neighborhood. I'll make the reservation, he said. She walked away. Behind her, she heard nothing. He didn't move immediately, she realized, or maybe he did, and he just moved silently, the way he did everything. But she had the sense that he stood there for a moment, on the sidewalk in the Chicago cold, with something in him that had been under pressure for a long time sitting, just briefly at rest. 43 days. That's how long it took from the night on Platform 9 to the morning Amara Osei's forensic accounting license was formally reinstated. 43 days. The same number as the original anomaly count in her first report. She would note this later, in the margin of her legal pad. Not as mysticism, as the kind of pattern that emerges when you're paying close enough attention. Warren Falk. His name entered federal investigation files within those 43 days. He would spend the following year in legal proceedings. The architecture of his scheme, 9 years for $112 million, 23 subsidiary entities, was ultimately dismantled by the documentation in that 312-page file, supported by the methodology reconstruction, the board resolution, the source declarations, and the operational communications that Kong Si-hoon had spent 3 years gathering. The money wasn't all recovered. It never is. But the story was told, on the record, in public filings, in a language that couldn't be buried or TRO'd or suppressed. Ji-yeon's story was in there. Unnamed. But there. Dex Caro faced a federal indictment. The charges included obstruction, evidence tampering, and aiding and abetting financial fraud at scale. His 5 attorneys got very busy. The outcome of that proceeding is still moving through the system. These things take time, but the record was clear. Amara Osei's termination was formally challenged and settled. The settlement amount, she said later in a brief interview, was adequate. She declined to specify. What she did say was, the reinstatement mattered more than the settlement. The record matters. The numbers tell the truth. They always do, if you read them long enough. Here's what I want to say to you before we close the story out. Because this isn't just a story about fraud and evidence and legal battles, even though all of that is real and all of it matters. And it isn't just a romance, though it is also that in the specific and quiet way that belongs entirely to these 2 particular people. This is a story about what happens when you refuse to put down something true just because the people in power need it buried. Amara Osei filed her original report knowing, she had to have known, that it would cost her. She had been in that building for 8 years. She had read enough corporate rooms to know what it means when a senior director turns your report face down on his desk. She knew. She filed it anyway. Not because she was fearless. She was afraid. She said so, clearly, when people ask. But she filed it because she had found something true, and the only alternative to filing it was living the rest of her professional life knowing she had seen something real and said nothing. She couldn't do that. And it cost her. It cost her her job, her professional standing, her safety, and a night on a platform at 11:47 p.m. with blood on her side and 4 men closing in. But here's what you need to understand about the mathematics of this kind of decision. The cost is real. And the cost is also, in the long run, smaller than the cost of silence. Because silence has a compounding effect too. Fraud that goes undocumented grows. People who escape consequences build larger schemes. The $412 million that Warren Falk accumulated didn't start at $412 million. It started at a first routing, a first misclassification, a first entry in an advisory account for $47,000, paid 3 days before the contract that was supposed to justify it. Small. Easy to miss. Easy to explain away. It grew for 9 years, because no one followed the trace all the way back. Amara followed it. That matters. And Kong Si-hoon. I want to spend a moment here, because his character in this story is easy to flatten, easy to make into either a savior figure or a morally convenient dark hero. He was neither of those things. He was a man who operated in a world with different rules from the one Amara moved in. He made no apologies for that and offered no comfortable explanations. He was dangerous. He had power that was not derived from any system Amara would have chosen to trust. And he used that power for 3 years, quietly, with no guarantee of outcome, to try to tell a true story about what had happened to Ji-yun and the people like her. He couldn't do it alone. He had the operational picture. He had the communications. He had the physical board minutes. But he didn't have the forensic language. He didn't have the methodology. He didn't have the 67 documented anomalies or the routing traces or the ability to stand in a federal courtroom and make a judge deny a TRO with prejudice. He needed someone who could do what he couldn't. He found her. And when he found her, when he finally had her across a desk with every resource she needed, he stepped back. He brought what she asked for. He sat down at 4 a.m. and checked citation cross-referencing without being asked. He made a dinner reservation on a night when neither of them had said anything personal because he was, underneath the cold and the calculation and the considerable danger, a person who made plans in the direction of things he cared about. He just didn't announce them. He let them arrive. There's something worth noting in that. They've had dinner 6 times since. 7 p.m. each time. He makes the reservation. She gets there first. She's back in independent practice now, forensic accounting, fraud investigation, a small firm she's building with 2 colleagues. The phone rings more than it used to. Some of the callers are attorneys. Some are compliance officers. Some are whistleblowers at early stages of cases that haven't yet broken into the open. She takes the calls carefully. She reads the rooms. She's been in enough of them now to know the difference between a room where truth is welcomed and a room where it's being managed. She doesn't file reports in rooms where truth is being managed. She builds the case from the outside. Kang Si-hoon is Kang Si-hoon. He is exactly as present in her life as he has been since the platform, deliberate, precise, arriving exactly when he says he will, carrying exactly what he said he'd bring. No more dramatic, no more declarative. But she has noticed over the 6 dinners that the silences between them have gotten less careful, less constructed. More like people who have stopped measuring and started simply existing in proximity to each other. She told him once, at the end of the 4th dinner, that she'd thought about the 18 months, the time he'd had her name, the 5 months of watching, the reservation made at 4 a.m. "Were you ever going to tell me," she said, "if the platform hadn't happened?" He looked at her for a moment. "I had a plan," he said. "It was slower than the platform." She looked at him. "What was the plan?" "To get close enough to the case through a mutual contact that you'd have encountered my name in your research." A pause. "And then to see if you'd reach out." She was quiet for a moment. "Would I have?" she said. He considered this seriously. "Probably not," he said. "You're careful." "I am. But I would have made sure the mutual contact mentioned," he said, "that I'd been working on the same target for 3 years." She looked at him. "And you thought that would be enough?" "I thought it was the correct beginning," he said, "for someone who responds to evidence." She laughed. Again, the real one. The short, genuine one. He watched her laugh, and something in his face, just for a moment, was very simple and very clear. "Evidently," she said, "you know me better than I thought." "I've been reading your work for 18 months, he said. "Knowing you was inevitable." The legal pad is still on her desk. It has a new one every few months. She goes through them quickly, and she keeps the old ones. The one from the 31 days in the West Loop building sits on her shelf. She can tell which one it is by the coffee ring on the cover from a mug she set down carelessly at around day 18, which was unlike her, and which she attributed later to the particular kind of distraction that comes from working alongside someone whose mind keeps catching you off guard. The last page of that legal pad has $412 million written in the middle of it. Below it, 67 anomalies. Below that, 312 pages. And at the bottom, in handwriting slightly different from the careful numeric script she uses for evidence, 43 days. Below that, she added something later. Not on the platform night. Not during the work. After the dinner. After the walkout. After he'd said I knew your name for 18 months before platform 9. 2 words at the bottom of a legal pad full of one of the most significant cases of her career. 7 p.m. Because here's what the story teaches, if you're paying attention. The truth has a trace. You can bury a board resolution. You can reroute $400 million through 23 shell entities across 4 jurisdictions. You can file a TRO and threaten a license and leave someone bleeding on a platform at midnight. But the trace is still there. In the routing logs. In the pre-contract payments. In the gap between what the official minutes say and what actually happened in that room. In the person who stayed up until 3:14 a.m. and found the document that changed everything. In the man who made a dinner reservation 3 weeks before there was any reason to think dinner was possible. Truth is patient. It waits in the numbers, in the paper, in the margins of legal pads, in the details that people who are afraid of the truth try to manage away. And when someone finally comes along who knows how to read it, who won't put it down just because it's costing them, who follows the trace all the way back to the beginning no matter what the beginning turns out to be, the truth surfaces. It always does. Amara Osei is 34 years old. She has a forensic accounting license in good standing, a small and growing practice, and a dinner reservation every week at 7 p.m. at a restaurant in the West Loop. Warren Falk is in a federal courtroom. His attorneys are very expensive and very busy. Dex Caro has not filed any TROs recently. And Kong Si-hoon, Chicago's most feared name, cold and calculated and running an empire that operates in the dark spaces between legal and not, sits across a table from a woman who reads numbers the way other people breathe and makes sure the reservation is always ready before she arrives. He told her something on the 6th dinner. She'd asked him, carefully in the way she asked things she actually wanted to know, whether it ever bothered him. The gap between his world and hers. The friction of it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you walked into this knowing what I was, he said. You set your terms before you agreed to anything. You never changed who you were to fit where you were. He met her eyes. That's not friction. That's the only version of this that I would have wanted.
She thought about that.
7 p.m., she said. Next week. I'll make the reservation, he said. And that's where we leave them. Not at a conclusion, because real things don't conclude, they continue, but at a moment. 2 people who weren't supposed to exist in the same world. Forced together by danger, bound by a case that took 43 days and 9 years of hidden truth to resolve, and undone, quietly, without announcement, with all the certainty of a number that's been checked 3 times, by something neither of them could have calculated. The evidence was always there. You just had to know how to read it.